Senator Portman met with the parents of some of the murdered children. And when they asked him to vote for the background check legislation that was then before Congress, Senator Portman told them, and I quote, "You know, I have an A rating from the NRA, so I'm probably not going to support this." And sure enough, he didn't. But that should come as no surprise. Senator Portman has always voted against background checks, including in 1993 when Congress passed the Brady Bill. He voted against background checks for guns bought at gun shows, against a ban on semi-automatic assault weapons, and he even voted against prohibiting gun purchases by violent juvenile offenders. Unfortunately, Ted Strickland's record has been even worse, which is why he earned not just an A rating from the NRA, but a rating of A+. In Congress, he voted to support everything Senator Portman voted against, and then he went a few steps further. Congressman Strickland voted against keeping assault weapons out of the hands of children. He voted to protect gun manufacturers, but opposed the funding necessary to enforce a child safety lock provision. And he even voted against banning the use of federal money to promote the commercial sale of elephant ivory and rhinoceros horns. Over the objection of police groups, Governor Strickland pledged to sign a bill allowing guns to be brought into bars and restaurants where alcohol is served. He signed legislation that weakened concealed carry restrictions, and when he ran for re-election in 2010, he boasted about voting against the Brady Bill's background checks and against what his campaign literature described as the Clinton gun ban. You know what the so-called Clinton gun ban was? It was a law passed by the Congress and signed by President Bill Clinton that took military-style assault weapons off our streets. But you know, Ted doesn't talk so much about the Clinton gun ban anymore, and it's easy to see why. These days, he's supporting another candidate named Clinton, one who's not only making gun safety a cornerstone of her campaign, but who recently said, and I quote, "We need to make every politician who sides with the NRA look into the eyes of parents who have been murdered and explain why they listen to the gun lobbyists instead." Apparently, that's not something Ted is anxious to explain. So he suddenly reversed himself and now says he actually supports the very same common sense background checks that he's always opposed and voted against. Next March, Democratic primary voters will have to decide for themselves whether they think Ted's election year conversion on guns is sincere or merely politically expedient. In the meantime, let me tell you about the kind of gun reforms that I will pursue in the United States Senate. First, I will unequivocally push for universal background checks that aren't watered down with gun show or other loopholes. Background checks work, and since 1998, they've blocked an estimated 2.3 million attempted gun purchases by dangerous people who shouldn't have them. The current federal law has two major loopholes that were championed by the NRA and supported by both Governor Strickland and Senator Portman. The first is that background checks are required only for guns sold by licensed dealers, which means that firearms sold at gun shows and often over the internet are free to be sold without a check. The second loophole is that even when a gun is purchased from a licensed dealer, the sale can go forward if the FBI takes longer than 3 days to complete the background check. Now, most of the time, this isn't a problem because the vast majority of checks take only a few minutes. But when there is something in a potential buyer's background that is uncertain and requires more investigation, the FBI may, in rare cases, take longer than 3 days. But rare cases can have catastrophic consequences. According to some estimates, the arbitrary 3-day rule has allowed more than 15,000 guns to be sold to dangerous people. One of them was a psychotic 21-year-old racist named Dylan Roof, who walked into Charleston's Mother Emanuel Church last summer and brutally murdered 9 innocent people with a gun that was sold to him by a licensed dealer, and after the background check took longer than 3 days. What other industry would tolerate this kind of policy? No bank loan officer would be allowed to hand out money after 3 days because a borrower's credit check was incomplete. No doctor would tell a patient she was cancer-free because it took longer than 3 days to get the lab results back. And how many parents would want a daycare worker cleared for duty with an incomplete background check? To be fair, many licensed dealers and a few large retailers are doing the right thing and refusing to sell a gun without a completed background check. But too many others are not acting responsibly, and that is why we cannot afford to count on voluntary compliance alone. I believe no check, no sale must become the law of the land, and in the Senate I won't rest until we close the Charleston loophole once and for all. But let's be honest, while they're a good first step, background checks alone won't be enough to stop the slaughter in our streets. We must also make straw purchases of guns a federal crime and revoke the licenses of bad actor dealers who have a history of selling guns to gang members, traffickers, and third-party purchasers.